long been talking about the need for more humanity in the workplace. And if you've listened to me for some time now, you know that I firmly believe that if we want to grow our confidence, we have to be more vulnerable. This week, I am excited to share my conversation with Mike Thompson, founder of Spark Recruiting, who shares his story of imposter syndrome and how therapy has helped him to invest in his mental health just as he invests in his physical health. We also talk about how to reimagine the hiring process to ensure greater diversity and encourage more people to not let self-doubt stand in the way of pursuing their career goals. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Good morning, Mike, and thank you again for being here. It's wonderful to meet you today, and I'd love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Well, first, Kim, thanks for having me on. And again, I said this before we jumped on. Thank you for this platform and this message and this mission. It's super important and something I'm very passionate about. So thank you for having me on, first off. I'm Mike. I'm, founder of Spark Recruiting, which is a recruiting agency that does things a little bit differently. I've been in the recruitment space my entire career I don't want to tell you how old I am, but it's been almost 15 years that I've been in the recruitment space. And through that, I've seen a lot. I've experienced a lot personally, as well as with people that I've worked with that I'm so excited to share with you. I'm also a relatively new father. I have a 2-year-old son, Oscar, that is, again, for all the parents out there, changes your perspective on life. And it's just, it's great. Like, life is awesome. And I'm just so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. And congratulations. That's an exciting time. And I was really intrigued by your story. You and I talked a little bit about this before we hit record, that in particular, I think it's less understood how imposter syndrome affects men. I don't think that it's something that's not experienced by men, but I think that a lot of times, just because of socialization and just different kinds of challenges, men aren't as comfortable necessarily sharing about it. So I so appreciated how open and honest you were in how you talked about your own story. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your own journey with imposter syndrome.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, just to touch on that before my story, I think there's a stigma out there that, toughness or being mentally tough is something where you're not fazed by things, and, you can just shake things off and plow forward and do all those things. It's incorrect. And I think everybody experiences this, and we're just not comfortable being vulnerable and communicating that. So I really want everybody to know that's listening, whoever it is, you're not alone. Everybody's experiencing this, and we need to normalize it so it becomes less of this big, scary monster, and we can really kind of minimize it. So my own story, I started in the industry right out of school, small company, thrusted into a sales kind of role where there was a lot of pressure put on early on. And I had a lot of success. And I was trying to figure out what I was doing while I was becoming successful. And I always felt that there was this thing in the back of my head that was like, just don't say anything, or don't let people know you don't know what you're doing, because then all of your success is going to go away. So just act the part like you know what you're doing. And there was always this side of me that was afraid of being found out, that, oh, Mike doesn't actually know what he's doing. And now all of a sudden all the success is going to go away. And it sounds generic, and it sounds like the cookie cutter definition, but it was there, and it stayed there for over a decade of, having this track record of success, but almost not trusting it, and thinking that I was fooling everybody and I needed to do it quickly because there was going to be a time it was all going to end. It was inevitable that it was all going to come crashing down, and you need to kind of make hay while the sun's shining before you get found out. So that was my entire career through multiple roles. It was as a recruiter, and then as I moved into sales, and then as I moved into a more senior sales position, and then I moved into a general manager role, and now even as an entrepreneur, and even as a father, you have these things. So it doesn't matter the role you have. There's always this doubt of, I don't know what I'm doing. And if I say that, then people are going to figure it out and I'm going to stop having success.
Oh, think your story is so familiar and I so appreciate your sharing it. And I want to ask you, because you make an important point. You had a track record of success. You were experiencing success, yet this voice lingered. And I'm curious if you could name what the challenges were of having that voice, because if you're sort of thinking about it, if you zoom out and you think about it from a non-emotional place, you might think, well, what's the big deal, right? You're being successful anyway, but it can be incredibly difficult to navigate. So I'm curious if you're able to think about, how did it affect you? What were some of the consequences of having that voice with you at all times?
Yeah, and it's been a lot of therapy that's helped me uncover a lot of this. But the real thing is, when you have this doubt, this emotional trigger that is just always there, whenever you experience success, it's a fluke. And when you experience a bit of a drawback or a bit of a stumble, that's the real thing. And that's what you hold on to. And that gets magnified. And successes get, oh, wow, lucky. And, when something goes wrong, your world is falling apart and it affects you. And even though it's emotional response, it starts affecting you physically. It affects how you show up at work. It shows how you show up in your relationships and how you view yourself. So it really just builds up as a snowball from something that you're just not trusting your track record that you have. And what I've learned is logically, if you step back and say, hey, listen, I've had 10 years of success. It's not all going to go away tomorrow. But when you're thinking emotionally, logic, it's a different language. You can't out logic an emotion. You have to ride out that emotion and understand that it's an emotional response, and it's going to play its course like a wave. It's going to come, it's going to go, and then you can go back to it. But when you try to fight it with logic, you have this difficult debate inside, and it's just like I've learned, and I'm still learning. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like I'm through it, because we manage it, but it's just a very difficult thing to overcome.
Oh, that was so well said, and I really appreciate what you said too about how when you have success, it's a fluke, but when you have a challenge or something bad happens, that's the real you, right? And so it's so hard to stay connected to those wins because they feel so fleeting. And so, just like, oh, well, I was lucky that time. And that is such a common experience. And I'm curious, because you articulate this so well, and you mentioned going through therapy. How did you know, I need to work on this? This is something I need to start addressing differently.
Yeah, and it really kind of started as a fluke. My therapy journey started from a fear of flying, which most people do. I was afraid to get on a plane, and it was holding me back to doing things, and I wanted to find a way to deal with this or manage this. So I explored it. And what I found is I come from an athletic background. I still love being an athlete, and I dedicate a lot of time to my physical performance, what I eat, what I train, how I recover. And I started thinking, how much effort and work am I putting into my mental health? If I'm putting this much work into my physical health, what am I dedicating towards my mental health? So I found these sessions about learning how to manage my fear of flying just continue to sometimes I didn't even know what I was going to be talking about. I still have a standing appointment with my therapist once a month, where sometimes I don't know what it is, but it's dedicated time for me to explore, how am I feeling? Why am I feeling the way I'm feeling? And does it matter? Sometimes no, but just that journey of self-exploration is my time to work on my mental health. And it's really important for me to have that in the calendar, to know that it's there. And through that experience, I've uncovered a lot. And we talked about the success and failure. And the trigger for me on that was I was materialistic to the point where I wanted to buy things to signal I was successful. So I would purchase things so other people would notice on me, wow, Mike, that's a nice pair of shoes you have. These are nice. Those are not. And their reaction to me would satisfy that reassurance that I was successful because I didn't feel it myself. So I needed that external recognition of success to counter the voice in my head that you're not successful. And through therapy, I've been able to kind of manage that. And, my retail therapy still gets out of hand a little bit, but at least I know where it comes from.
And I love how you talk about therapy as something that's an investment in your mental health in the same way that you invest in your physical health. Because speaking of stigma, right, I still think that even though we're at a place in history where it's safer than ever to talk about our mental health, it's still not safe enough. And I think there are too many people who suffer in silence, too many people who don't access resources because they're afraid of being that vulnerable. And so, one of the things that you said that really jumped out at me is just what I interpret as raising the unconscious to the conscious level so that you can actually decide, is this a useful thought or a useful way of engaging in the world around me? And I think of it as almost like a pause button, right? Because we're all going so fast and things are happening so subconsciously that unless you insert these practices that give you time to evaluate, am I thinking about this in a way that works for me? We're not going to have different thoughts. We're not going to be able to recondition ourselves. So I'm curious what that journey was like for you too, because I know it's not a switch that you flip suddenly.
Yeah. And it's, it's uncomfortable, to be honest. It is, because sometimes you get frustrated, and a lot of it is frustrations when you're dealing with, a therapist, and they're great at asking questions that make you look inwards and think about things differently. And sometimes you don't have the answer, and that frustrates you, and you get anxious because you're trying to figure it out and you can't figure it out. And there was a lot of frustrations, but that's the process. Is you're almost trying to figure out why you do the things you do and where that comes from, and if you want to change it or not. Sometimes you don't. And I look at it more like performance, and people think about, and I talk openly about, seeing a therapist regularly, and people have this look that's like, oh, what's wrong with you? And that's the problem. Is, well, first of all, there's a lot of things wrong with me, but there's a lot of things wrong with everybody. And it's less about, I'm dealing with this thing, and it's a performance thing for me. Like, I don't know how to navigate myself in terms of the questions to ask, to dedicate the time to explore these things. I seek out a professional to guide me on that journey. And it's not on them to solve the problems for you, but it's on them to help you figure yourself out. That brings a lot of things to the surface that, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. And certainly the topic we're talking about today is, it helped me manage that, know where that was coming from, and how to manage it going forward. And I think that's super important, because most people, like you said, suffer in silence. They don't know there's something wrong, and they operate every day with this, these thoughts or these things that are holding them back because they don't know how to manage it.
It's such a great point. And it is so interesting when you think about it in these terms of, well, obviously, I don't know, why would I know this stuff? But there is such a fear factor associated with admitting that or taking that kind of action. And you actually answered the question I was going to ask next, but I'd love for you to expand on this a little bit of, do you talk to your friends about this? Do you share this? And I'd love to hear more about the response. Do you feel like, not that this is your job, but do you feel like your willingness to be open about this does influence the people around you and their willingness to be more vulnerable?
Yeah, I'm careful about talking about it. Like, I don't want to pressure anybody into thinking they need to do this, or to almost talk about it like it's a cool thing to do, in terms of, oh, my therapist said, or, oh, this, or my therapist thinks this, or, oh, you said this, my therapist would say this. Like, nobody wants to be that person. Nobody wants to be around that person. But I think when you're having deep conversations with your friends, more on a one-on-one basis, you can be vulnerable and open up. And I think for me, vulnerability is how you build relationships. If you can't be vulnerable with anybody, how can you expect that same vulnerability back? So for me, I can speak to that point, and I don't fear that I'm going to be judged, because this is who I am. This is my authentic, genuine self. And if you don't accept me for who I am, then we have a problem. And I'd rather know now than later on, in terms of, we're not the right individual for each other to be, helping grow each other. That's the point of having friends and support, is, you need to be there for each other, and it's, you grow together. So I talk openly. All my friends know, and some of my friends even came up to me and, kind of said that they've gone and done it themselves. And it's something that's great, because they now feel comfortable to talk about it. And it's, men don't talk about it enough. And I think it's just, I don't know why. I really want to just say, it's not a stigma. It doesn't mean anything. It shouldn't be associated with anything. You should feel comfortable being yourself.
I love that. I love that you are seeing an impact on your friends too. And it is unfortunate. And it actually leads me to want to talk a little bit about the workplace these days, right? Because you've been in the workplace, and as an entrepreneur and a recruiter, you see a lot of different things. And so, it's hard to even know where to start, but I think about the pandemic as being this turning point in how we look at humanity within the workplace. And certainly it brought to the surface a lot of what was not working, and it sort of has created more, I don't know if permission is the right word, but for vulnerability, right? Both on the physical and the mental health side of things. And I wonder if you have a perspective on what organizations should be thinking about in terms of creating more space for the kind of vulnerability, because you and I are talking about it more so in friendship-based relationships, but this applies to the workplace too. And so for people to be able to do their best work, to feel safe, to share their ideas, to feel connected to the environment around them, these same conditions have to exist. And historically, that has not been a focus within corporations or workplaces. It's been much more like, check your humanity at the door and get the work done, right? So how do you see that world these days, given your vantage point?
Yeah, this is my life's work, and this is my passion. And this is why I love the trend where we're going, where, it's not work-life balance, it's life-work balance in terms of where work fits into my life instead of vice versa. So I feel like the pandemic has really put the pause button, as you said, on everybody to kind of say, what matters in my life? And obviously work is a big part of people's lives. You dedicate a lot of time and energy to work, and you want it to be meaningful. And whether it's in the nature of the work you do, the organization, the mission that they're driving towards, or the impact you have on a day-to-day basis and who you're working with. So I find a responsibility of organizations to really figure out who you want in those leadership roles. Because as much as an organization has policies around empathy or compassion or all of these diversity, all of these buzzwords we hear, if the individual leaders don't reflect those, it doesn't matter. And I find the way that organizations promote individuals into leadership positions is flawed. The highest performer on the team becomes the manager of the team. Are they the best person to be managing a group of individuals? Maybe, but most times not necessarily. So I find those decisions in terms of who we put in those people management positions is going to have the largest impact on how organizations move forward to address a lot of these issues.
And do you, when you're talking with organizations as part of your work, do you get to weigh in on that? Do you find that your voice influences how they think about the ideal candidate and what they're, how they're going about trying to identify the right person for the roles that they're looking for?
I would like to say all the times, yes. But I would say in most cases, for sure. Like, I think there's a vulnerability organizations have right now when it comes to hiring, and it's only because of the market. The market has dictated that organizations are vulnerable because the talent pool has more options than they've ever had before. So there's the vulnerability. If bank ABC is hiring tomorrow, that's not unique because they all are. So now what? And that's the next phase where organizations have to adapt to this vulnerability that they have. And that's forcing them to think differently about how they hire and who they hire. So there's more influence I can have in these discussions now just because of market conditions.
And, I always worry about the fact that the pendulum tends to swing so far from one direction to the next. I'm hoping that these conditions are not so fleeting that they don't result in meaningful, long-lasting change.
I agree. And I don't think that's going to be the case because this has always been, when we talk about diversity hiring, and I talk about diversity in terms of, looking at people from different backgrounds, different experiences that can do a job, that's always been a benefit. It's been well documented for decades that a diverse team actually has significant impact on financial results of the organization. But it hasn't been put into practice for a long time until the pandemic, until the market has forced you to hire differently and not hire the executive that was doing the exact job they were doing previously and now they're doing for your company, because the market is causing people to, there's too many jobs than there are people to fill them. So now you have to think differently. And now this diverse hiring is happening and you're putting these people in these roles and they're excelling in it. So now it's not just a short-term solution. They're seeing the benefits that people have been documenting for decades of this type of hiring and of this diverse hiring. So I feel optimistic that it's not going to swing the other way because we've finally been able to do this and it's working.
That's really great to hear. I'm encouraged by the fact that it's proving the model, right? And I'm curious too, if we can take a look at it from the candidate side for a moment, because you and I talked a little bit about this offline too, of just that is a natural point when people start to experience imposter syndrome and start to say things like, well, who am I to go after this kind of a job? Or I can't compete with people who have all this other experience. And I imagine that this is just your daily life. Do you have certain, I guess, are there certain indicators for you that is what's going on? And do you support people around that?
Yeah, and I think the job, this is where this conversation collides for me, because in my line of work, what I'm trying to change is the whole nature of the hiring process is doesn't help with imposter syndrome. And I'll tell you why. Look at the job description. It's the only form of collateral that's used to market a job. And if you scroll to the bottom of a job description, you have required skills and experience. It's a list of 15 things that people need to have on the job. What they're setting you up for, nobody has those. Nobody has all of those things. So looking for a job is already vulnerable enough. You're putting yourself out there because you want to try something and you're unsure of if you're qualified or not. And then you read this, and what brings to the surface of what you don't have, why you're not the right person, why you're not fit. So it reinforces all of these things you already have in the back of your mind, that you're not enough and you don't have the experiences. The job description reinforces that. So what happens? People that are overconfident in their ability, men, have 20% of the required in jobs. Rock stars, we're going to apply for this job. Women need 90% of the required skills and experience before they feel confident enough that they're actually going to apply for the job. So what happens? They just don't apply because they feel like if they do apply, they're set up to fail, and it's just going to reinforce all of these voices in their head telling them they're not good enough. So the whole hiring process is what I'm trying to change, because nobody needs those 15 required skills and experiences. And we can really simplify that and do a better job of promoting and highlighting what people have. Everybody is unique. You go online and you see everybody I'm looking for the next rock star, unicorn, Loch Ness monster, whatever the make-believe thing is that doesn't exist, which I have issues with that. We can talk about that later. But Everybody is unique. Everybody is that person because nobody has your story. Nobody has seen the world and had the experiences that you do. So you are unique. You are a rock star. The job process, the hiring process should be one of understanding what somebody's story is and how they can contribute to the job versus are you good enough to do this job and where do you fall short?
Mm. Oh my goodness. I feel like you're in my brain. I love that. So and not that this is an answer you can give in a couple of minutes, but how do we get there? Because it really is a paradigm shift. And I feel like a lot of what's happening isn't even necessarily thought about. It's kind of, well, this is the way we go about hiring. This is the way we go about creating job descriptions. There isn't necessarily, especially in really busy, under-resourced organizations, there doesn't even seem to be time carved out to rethink what it might look like in a better way. And so how do you get this to happen on a systemic level?
Well, certainly if we're successful at doing this, we'll look back at this and say, hey, Mike called a shot and this is what it does. But what I believe is the most effective way at hiring, referrals. You can never compete with referrals. And if you think about how that works, it's very casual. It's very conversational. There's never a job description. It's, hey, Kim, I know someone that would be perfect to work for you for these reasons because they are A, B, C. Awesome, Mike. I would love to meet them. It's very to the point of who they are, the skills they have, and I know you and they can help you. Then when you connect, it's very simplistic in terms of the language you use to describe what the job is. Hey, this is the job. This is what success looks like. What do you think? That's it. And that's been the most effective way at hiring for as long as I can remember. Now, somewhere along the way, we try to systemize it by creating a wish list of the perfect candidate for every single hire when that doesn't exist and that's not realistic. So I believe the way to scale it is to scale the personal referral method. And that's what we're working on. And that's what our mission is to really just put the hiring manager on a video talking about what is this role and what would success look like and what skills would be great for this. Let's really humanize this experience instead of having them list, well, Mike, I would like 10 plus years of this experience and I would like them to have 7 plus years of this followed by a university degree from these things. Nobody speaks like that, but that's the way job description is listed. Where you would say to me, you know what success in this role would look like? Someone that can come in and do X. Awesome. That's a great starting point. Let's go from there. So simplifying the job from a skills perspective, what skills would contribute to success instead of what we need everybody to have, I think is how we're going to solve this problem.
I couldn't agree with you more. And one question I have for you is, I wholeheartedly agree on the networking front. I also worry sometimes that if networks aren't diverse enough, we're just going to keep perpetuating the same kind of person in these roles. And so are there things that we can all think about in terms of how do we continue to diversify networks so that we're getting access to more different kinds of profiles and it's not just a cookie cutter of the same person?
It's so hard. And I think you nail it. It's a challenge because of the way algorithms are on social media. You see what you believe, right? So it's very difficult to try to build diversity. I think it's what we talked earlier. It starts with self-awareness. It starts with understanding what you believe in, where you're at, and what might be valuable to balance that to help you grow. But there's not enough people taking a step back to really understand themselves. So they just jump into these social networking websites and all they see is just reinforcing what they already believe in. And it becomes very difficult to build a diverse network when that's all you're seeing and prescribing to you. You think you are. You're adding people, you're commenting on things, you're contributing, but you're only seeing your version of that. So it is very difficult to build a diverse network. It starts with being aware of that. First off, is that what you see online is not everything. It's your version of that. And to be aware of that and to seek out kind of other individuals or other viewpoints and start engaging in that will help. But it is challenging. And then that's something that we struggle with, even in hiring and even as I'm building a network. And, you see what the algorithm wants you to see.
You're absolutely right. But what I love about what you're saying is that I always try to separate out what's the macro level responsibility, meaning what is the organization responsible for? And in what we're talking about, they're responsible for a lot. But I'm also a big believer in personal self-empowerment and personal accountability. And what I like about what you just said is that it's something that every single one of us could think about and do better. We can all take action on that. It's not going to be limited to what the organization is doing, but to really think to ourselves, like, what can I be doing to have a more diverse network so that when somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you know anybody who can do this job? I have a more diverse pool to pull from.
Exactly. And I agree with you completely. I think we can all individually micro level do this, and enough of that happening, that micro disruption turns into transformation. And I think a lot of individuals feel it's daunting. It's not going to change because of me. It's like, well, if everybody says that, then nothing does change. So, be like, consider yourself, and I consider myself, and I empower everybody. You're a micro disruptor because you acknowledge that you want to do things differently, or you're looking at improving. And I think this term of micro disruption is key, because if you feel empowered to be a micro disruptor, then you have a responsibility to do it. So consider yourself a micro disruptor and challenge the status quo. And then you'll surround yourself and your tribe and community of other micro disruptors who are also looking at doing the same.
I love that language so much. I think that's such a great way to think about it. Any thoughts on how candidates who are really doubting themselves and not moving forward with something because they don't meet 100% of the qualifications, like any thoughts you would have or advice you would share with people who are in that process and maybe their self-doubt is getting the best of them right now?
For sure. And the best thing I can think of is I became so fascinated in storytelling as an art, and started reading a bunch of books about storytelling and how to tell a story. And you go down a rabbit hole, and I just read one about stand-up comics and like their process. And most stand-up comedians are not funny. They're not in real life. They're performers. And what they talk about is it's work, it's observation. So what I tell candidates, anybody, you have so many powerful stories. We have to uncover them, because I can't tell your story, but you can tell your story. And every day something happens that is unique to you. That's a great story. So start becoming aware of that. And there are a lot of great tools out there. There's the 5-minute journal. There's the gratitude journal. There's so many different things you can do, but it's just as easy as thinking about something great that happened today. Write it down. You have a collection of all of these awesome stories that are great. And then when you're at a party, you're at a networking event, you're in an interview, and someone says, well, tell me something different about you. You have so many different stories that you can draw from, where I think most people aren't paying enough attention to their own lives, that when it's like, tell me about yourself, what you say is, well, I graduated from university, and you regurgitate your resume. It's like, no, I can see that. Tell me something unique about you. And I'll tell you a story that brings this to light. I was interviewing for a small startup client of mine, a director of finance role. And generally, like it or not, people that work in startup want people from startup. We could talk about why that's, but whatever. And I was interviewing this woman that had 20 years of big company experience. She'd worked in large enterprise. And I was curious. So I'm interviewing her and I'm asking her, saying, you've always worked in big companies. Moving to a small company startup is challenging because people in startup want people from startup. So that's going to be an obstacle we're going to have to overcome. Why do you want to work in this job, in this startup? And she said to me, she said, Mike, this is embarrassing, but I'm a single mom and I have a daughter that's 13, and I'm starting to see that she has signs of being an entrepreneur. She's very entrepreneurial. I think she could be a great entrepreneur. And as a parent, I feel inadequate to guide her on that journey because I've never had this experience. So I am seeking out to work at a startup so I can get this experience to be a better parent to my daughter. And she said, now that she's like, and then she said, she's sorry. And I stopped her and I said, you just told me more about you in that story than any resume, any LinkedIn profile could ever tell. You told me about your motivations, your values, everything. This makes you a phenomenal candidate because of this story. That's a vulnerability. And that's such a great story that more people need to be honest and talk about their intentions. And I tell this story because it's perfect. It's authentic. It's raw. It's vulnerable. And that's real. And I want more people to feel empowered to tell their stories and not be apologetic about it either.
I hope everyone takes that as inspiration, because you're absolutely right. And I particularly love the actionable part of that, of logging the stories, because you're right. I mean, when you're put on the spot and asked to share something about yourself, it's funny because you do those icebreakers where it's like, say something interesting about yourself. So much pressure. We're like, there's nothing, everybody else is interesting, I'm not interesting. But if you have that database to pull from, that is such a great strategy to just kind of keep going.
Yeah, I stole it. I mean, I'd like to say it's my own, but I stole it and I read it. And I mean, but you start going through the process. I mean, yesterday I was walking with Oscar. We're walking down the street, had to go get a bottle of wine because, it's Sunday night, bottle of wine. And as we're walking back, he wanted to stop at the dollar store and get a toy. And I had this thought in my head. It was like, am I spoiling my son by giving in and saying yes to do this? This is a bad parenting move. Or is this like a F it, it's fine, it's a dollar store toy, it doesn't mean that much. But am I overthinking it or am I underthinking it? And I had this moment of contention. And then as I'm thinking this, we're already in the dollar store and we're getting a dump truck. And that's how it ended. So you have these moments that happen every day that you just need to be aware of. And sometimes there's something, sometimes they're nothing. But I always try to think about moments in the day that happen that are somewhat interesting to me anyway.
Yeah, you never know when they might come up in a conversation. It's great. It's such a great tip. So, Mike, this has been an amazing conversation. Any final thoughts you want to share, and where can people find you if they want to follow up?
Yeah, so people can find me. I'm on LinkedIn too much, but I love connecting with people. I love learning about people, and I love helping people uncover their own uniqueness and their own story, and then being able to tell it in a way. So Mike Thompson, Spark Recruiting on LinkedIn, find me, please connect with me. I love learning and meeting with people. And what I want people to take away from this is there is power and strength in vulnerability and self-awareness. Know yourself, be fully comfortable with who you are, and know that everybody is trying to figure it out and nobody has it figured out. So we're all, I don't want to say we're all works in progress because that's a, overused term, but we're all trying to get a little bit better each day. And, don't feel a certain way by seeking help or, having these doubts about yourself. We all do, and you're not alone.
What a powerful way to wrap up today. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.